to do as part of the marketing exercises, they will produce a book the same size as the hardback, but just with a paperback cover. And it's inside, it's more or less the text as it will finally appear, but it will have mistakes in it. And those are quite valuable because it's a very limited print run. And precisely because they've got mistakes in, weirdly, that makes it valuable. It's like stamps that have got misprints on them.
So there's not always a spelling mistake then?
No, it's just, yeah. So, and if you then can bring your uncorrected proof copy and get an author to sign it, that can be quite valuable. Just because it's rare, relatively.
And if the person you dedicate to suddenly becomes famous?
Well, that's great too.
Yes.
You're laying plans, I can tell. Yes.
Do you have to check for the loose ends being tied up, or is there somebody who follows the character through?
Oh, there's quite a network, but it lets me down every time. I mean, I have to be my own first editor. Obviously, I can't blame other people necessarily, but there is a copy editor who will go through looking for, and I always use the same one because he's really good. And he looks for things, literally continuity errors. If the weather changes halfway through a chapter.
Would every author have that? Would every author?
In theory, every author does. Not every author fights to have a good one because they don't always realise how important they are. And I found one quite by chance on an earlier novel, and I've hung on to his email address, and I always insist on using him because he invariably comes up with things I just haven't noticed that were wrong. But things always slip through. It's maddening. And I love it when readers send me an email and say, oh, by the way, I'm a tree surgeon and you got this detail wrong, or I'm a skin surgeon, you got this detail. Because I will then insist on getting them corrected, and because it's all computer-based now, your publishers they can't change it in every book that's in the shops, but they can ensure that future printings have that mistake changed.
Yeah, because I'm reading a novel that is fashion at the moment, and the medication is one I'm on, and she's talking about the brown, but it's not, it's a bubble pack.
Well, there you go. It is upsetting. It is upsetting as soon as there's something you actually know. Yeah, that's true.
And how long did it take you to write this novel?
About a year, I should think. I'd say 2 years because I always, with every novel, I sort of spend about a year thinking about it before I pick up my pen. And I think that year of thinking is crucial because it's during that year that the characters will start to take shape. So I'm just reaching the end of a talking year. I've been talking about this and not writing at all. And I start writing my new novel on November the 20th. It's in my diary, start new novel. I already, the main characters certainly are taking shape quite rapidly in my head, because I've been thinking about them on endless train journeys all year.
Not every novel on the
No, that's just the first gap in my diary. But I do try to, I take that whole business of dividing my life very seriously, because I can't combine promoting one book with writing another. So I think you can do both jobs better if you separate them out. So I now do this quite categorically, and as of November the 20th, I will be saying no if any nice librarian rings up until I finish the next book. And then,
I mean, when you say you talk about it, do you talk to people about it, or is it all interior monologue?
It's on interior. I talk a bit, but not much. I'm rather superstitious about that. Helen Dunmore, who I've quite often worked with on teaching writing courses, has a lovely way of, she says you have to have a front garden and a back garden to every book. And the front garden is what you show people, friends and relations who ask. And it's very neat and tidy, and you only have a few details in there, but it's neat. And what they never see is the kind of Freudian nightmare at the back, which is what you know to be going on. And it's quite important to keep that bit hidden, I think, so it can carry on changing shape. I get very worried when I have to commit myself to a certain storyline before I've actually written the story. And that does happen quite often. Publishers will say, well, we need something to put in the catalogue. What's the book about? And I don't really know yet. It's odd. And sometimes you have to say what the book's about in order to sell it before you've written it. So I've just changed publishers for the first time in about 20 years. And as part of the deal, my new publishers wanted to buy the next 2 books, whatever I wrote, but I had to write them 2 pages of A4 describing what the new book would be.
So at the front garden, you let them have.
They had a very tiny front yard. They don't know the half of it. My front garden, yes. Well, the new book is working title is Western Approaches, but that might change. And I've already checked on Google, there are no novels called Western Approaches. And it's a big departure for me, because it's set in around 1910 to 1920, for the most part. And it's based on a mystery in my own family history, on my mother's side this time, not my father. My father's family were very, very stable. They lived in this beautiful house. They produced priests and landowners, and they did nothing of any excitement whatsoever. Whereas my mother's side of the family were very rackety and naughty and full of alcoholics and actresses and whatever. And there's this mystery in that my great-grandfather and his brother married 2 sisters and this big family of 14 children. It's a huge age spread. And one brother, the younger brother, his marriage was fine and that all went perfectly well, but the older brother, my great-grandfather, did something wrong, which was regarded as so wrong by his in-laws that they ganged up and said, "You are to leave your young wife and toddler with us and go away and never come back. And here's a ticket to Canada." And they banished him, and he went. And there was no eye-to-eye contact between him and his wife again. She died of breast cancer, poor thing, very soon afterwards, actually. Hideous, sort of, she had a mastectomy at home, and which went wrong. And my poor granny was raised by all these rather uncaring aunts and uncles, and didn't see her long-lost father until the 1950s, when this, to her horror, when she was sort of newly widowed and starting a new life, this funny old man from Canada suddenly showed up, clearly wanting her to take him in and look after him in his old age, and she was having none of it because she didn't know him, and she sent him packing. But I think there's much more to the story than she used to let on. She would just dismiss it and say, "Oh, he was a reprobate," or sometimes she'd say, "Oh, he lost all his money." And I think she knew there was something much more interesting. And I've inherited this great stash of letters between my mother and her mother. They wrote a letter every week, from the day my mother married to the day or the week my grandmother died. 2 pieces of Basildon bond every time, very punctual. And they're wonderfully frank, the way mothers and daughters are. They don't hold back at all. And I realised, after I started to sort of put them in order, that they cover the period when cowboy grandpa came on his visit. And I think somewhere in there, Granny will have let slip some detail, or my mother will have let slip some detail that will give me a clue. And what I can't find out, I'm going to make up. We'll see. I think it might end up being like a weird mixture of E.M. Forster and Brokeback Mountain. I'm looking forward to the research trip.
That's quite a colourful background to be brought up against then, isn't it?
Yeah, there's heaps there. And I've got wonderful, wonderful photographs of all the formidable aunts and uncles.
Is your mother still alive?
My mother is still alive, but rather conveniently has developed Alzheimer's. So she can't, she tries to read, she pretends she's reading, and I know she's not really, because I see her going through the same book over and over again. She's got completely obsessed on the book she really enjoyed in the 1960s. So every time I look in her little walker, she's got another Victoria Holt in there. Or a Mary Stuart. Do any of you read Mary Stuart still? They're wonderful, wonderful. Every time I have flu, I get one down off the shelf. They're fabulous books. And I don't understand why they've never been done for television, because I think somebody should do them. There's a particularly good one called Madam, Will You Talk? If you haven't read them, I think you should do a Mary Stuart display here, because I guarantee they will all get borrowed. And the lovely thing about those books is they become period pieces now. So if you were to film them now, the heroines would have wonderful sort of 1958 clothes and 1963 sort of Courage Max and things. It would be fun from a design point of view. And they're great plots and very well written. But actually, that was a long answer to you saying, does my mother? My mother is still very much with us, but she's off with the fairies most of the time, sadly. But probably a good thing from my point of view. There's no one left alive or conscious, sufficiently conscious to be offended. As far as I know, I'm going to Canada, of course, next year to research bits of it. Not least to go to the place where my grandfather settled, which is now a ghost town, called Winter, Saskatchewan. And for all I know, he had another family out there. I will find out. I may have lots of Canadian cousins I've never met. which would be really irritating, because I have to change my book. I think we have time for one more question. Has anyone not asked a question yet who's feeling terribly shy but would like to?
Did you start to write when you were very young?
I did, in that I wrote very naturally when I was young. I had a sort of facility, and I seemed to lack any inhibition about it. Most boys get quite inhibited quite quickly about creative writing, and I didn't. Probably because I was a terrible sissy, I think. But I never thought it would be a job. It was just something I did all the time. I always wrote stories, and because I had that sort of mother, she kept everything any of us ever did, and they've all come back to me now. She's in an old people's home. And I'm coming across all these old exercise books that they weren't school books, they were just exercise books I used to fill with stories in the holidays. So I was obviously doing it, but I thought I was going to be a musician for years, and then I thought I was going to be an actor. And writing was just something that I always imagined just doing on the side for fun.
And have you always had a love for it? Did you ever lose that along? Has it always been consistent?
I've always loved it. I think I can't separate it from my love of reading, because I think the two processes are almost indistinguishable. I think the same thing goes on in your brain when you're reading as goes on in my brain when I'm writing. I think they're very, very close. And actually, there's a professor and his team in the University of Toronto who are researching just this. They're looking at what happens physiologically in your brain when you read fiction. And they're trying to find out why it is that people are so compelled to go back to fiction time and again, but also why they're compelled to keep writing it. And the thought is that actually it really does affect your powers of empathy, and that there's something deeply pleasurable about having your powers of empathy stretched. We like the way within the safe arena of a book, our sympathies can be made to reach out to somebody who we wouldn't dare speak to in real life, but in a book it's safe and you can reach out in that way. And I find the same when I'm writing. I love the sense I'm using myself. I'm just trying other people on for size, as well, without trying to sound like Hannibal Lecter. Which grisly note, I think it's time you heard who won the poetry competition. So thank you all very much.